Fighters is an unusual relic of Sonic's past. The game hails from a time when Sonic had not yet really made the leap to 3D, and Sonic games were hard to find. Everyone wanted a full 3D Sonic game on the Sega Saturn, and it just plain wasn't happening. The game also has kind of an amusing backstory. You see, according to legend, while they were making Fighting Vipers, one of the programmers decided to, just sort of as a joke, make Sonic and Tails models and throw them into the game. According to legend, it was at that time Yuji Naka walked past the guy's cubicle, saw Sonic and Tails fighting on the screen, and said, "Hey, that's a great idea! Make it happen." And thus, Sonic the Fighters was born, released into Japanese arcades, and American fans were quite excited to play it. However, funny story, Sega of America actually said no. They did not want to release the game in America. They said the idea of Sonic punching people and fighting was like Mickey Mouse getting into a brawl with people. It just plain wasn't right.
They'll pay for this.
My, how times have changed. No, wait! My, how times have changed. Eventually, though, Sega of America caved. They did release Sonic the Fighters in America under the title Sonic Championship, a game which had such a limited distribution that no one actually knows the US title of Sonic the Fighters is Sonic Championship. It's a stupid name anyway. What's that mean, Sonic Championship? You'd think it'd just be a versus Sonic game or something like Sonic Rivals. But grammar aside, Sonic the Fighters is a better, more descriptive name, and the name everyone knows it by anyway because it seriously took Sega of America that long to release the game in America. However, while we all expected the game to get a Sega Saturn port, such a port never really materialized. For the longest time, the closest most of us would ever get to actually playing Sonic the Fighters was that one scene in the Sonic anime and playing Bean vs. Bark matches in Fighters Megamix. It would be practically a full decade before Sonic the Fighters would actually receive a home port on the GameCube and PS2 in the Sonic Gems collection, which right from the cover you can tell that was what they considered to be the main attractions. Sonic the Fighters finally gets a home port. Oh, sure, yeah, we tried to play it in emulators, but if you tried emulating polygonal games, it usually doesn't turn out too well. They usually run way too slow. So being able to actually play the game the way it, like, with proper graphics, no crazy glitches, at full speed, was definitely something fresh and new, even though the game was like a decade old at that point and definitely felt more than a little outdated. And then, a few years later, Sega would release the game on Xbox Live Arcade and PSN as part of their Model 2 collection, which I actually think was a pretty brilliant idea. You see, Sega decided to have M2 port a bunch of their Model 2 arcade hardware games, but rather than releasing them all as a $15 pack of like 3 games, they opted instead to chop it up and sell each game individually for $5, which I can't stress enough was a brilliant idea, and I'm pretty certain it meant that these things sold much better and Sega made more money. Either way, M2 did a phenomenal job with this port. They took the textures, really cleaned them up, made them look better. They're displaying the game in high definition, 1080p, 60 FPS, and let me tell you, I know this sounds crazy, but flat shaded polygons have never looked so good. Seriously, like, this game doesn't even look bad. It is a legitimately good looking game, even though it's like, what, running on 15, almost 20 years old now? It looks pretty darn nice. And while the game is lacking in the training mode and a lot of extra features department, the netcode is surprisingly fantastic. Seriously, I've played from people, like, out of the country, in Hawaii, you know, whatever, and it plays good. There's little to no lag. The online play is phenomenal. But the real surprise was the fact that M2 decided to go the extra mile with this theme, adding 3 brand new characters you can only play in this release. 2 of them are just Metal Sonic and Dr. Eggman, the boss characters which they hacked into being playable. These can only be played in versus mode or in player matches because they're completely broken and only one person can play each character anyway. But it's the third one that's the real surprise. Honey from Fighting Vipers as a cat. You see, hackers actually went into the game code a long while back and found that there was data for this extra playable character. Apparently, Sega was planning on having Honey the cat be like some kind of bonus secret guest character thing, probably due to the distinct lack of female characters in the Sonic series at the time. However, the character was completely unfinished, and attempts to hack her into being playable only sorta half worked. Her eyes would act weird, her pigtails wouldn't display properly. They couldn't really get the character running 100%. Until this port. M2 actually went in there, cleaned up the code, and effectively speaking, finished the character, making her into a fully functional playable character. Mind you, Honey basically just plays like Knuckles except with Amy's running moves and no spin dash, making her probably the worst character in the game. But still, it's an awesome addition, and the best part is, yes, you can play as her in the single-player arcade mode. Just select Amy and press start over her. Also interesting is the fact that Honey is the only character that actually has a proper alternate color. Everyone else just gets a black and white clone made by Dr. Eggman, which is actually a pretty neat touch to see, and the reasoning behind it will kind of make sense. The coloration of the characters is super iconic. It's sort of a part of who they are. You change that and someone could claim it was like an original character, Do Not Steal or something. So the only way to avoid having someone think that this was a new character and not just an alternate color of Sonic was to make it a black and white version of Sonic. My, how times have changed. But this raises the really important question, is Sonic the Fighters any good? And that point is, well, certainly debated.
Number 4. We all know the 90s were littered with hundreds and hundreds of fighting games. So why not give Sonic one too?
Hitting the arcades in 1996, gamers were treated, and we use that term loosely, to a cast of 8 characters attempting to save the world. You can beat the entire game by tapping one button over and over again. We can understand trying to capitalize on a fad, but this is just ridiculous.
Whippy! Nothing says quarter-popping fun like being molested by a green Howard the Duck.
Alright, 2 things. Number 1, that statement is completely false. When you get to the third opponent, Bark the Polar Bear, the difficulty level distinctly ramps up and just mashing punch does not work. Well, it's partially true in the case of Sonic due to his incredibly high punching speed and his standard punch combo. However, that doesn't work in actual human versus human opponent matches, which is what really matters in a fighting game. I mean, really, we're going to judge this based on the AI? Seriously? And number 2, gad, I hear this same complaint all the freaking time. Seriously, anytime you have a 3D fighter that isn't part of an established, well-known, long-running series, people always use this complaint that you can just beat the game by mashing punch in order to say that the game is crap. Heck, sometimes even when it is part of an established series, if it's fallen out of favor, people will use this complaint. Any 3D fighter, if someone just doesn't like it, they'll use this complaint. Just due to the way 3D fighters work. If they're based at all on Virtua Fighter, yeah, you can press punch 3 times. Instead of doing 3 of the same punch, you'll do a chain of 3 punches that flow into one another. That's the way most 3D fighters work. And because of that, just mashing punch is far more effective in basically all 3D fighters than it is in 2D fighters. Whether it's Soul Calibur, Bloody Roar, Virtua Fighter, heck, even Tekken to some degree, all of these games have this same quote-unquote problem, and it's just a question of if the reviewer likes the game or not. It's almost a throwaway complaint, and if that's the only complaint you have, then your review is null and void. I'm sorry. Because you have to find more than just, oh, I could just beat the game by mashing punch. Again, try that against a human opponent and tell me how well that works out, okay? So, alright, let's get into it. Sonic the Fighters, how is it? The game uses a 3-button layout very similar to Virtua Fighter. You've got punch, kick, and barrier. Barrier is sort of the new mechanic to this game. Instead of just blocking like normal, you put up a barrier, like the item you get in the actual Sonic games. However, you have a limited number of barriers, and if your opponent does a particularly strong attack, it will break your barrier. When you run out of barriers, you are no longer able to block. On the flip side, pressing back, punch, and kick simultaneously will use one of your barriers to put you into hyper mode, which allows you to go extra fast and do combos that aren't normally possible, and even unlocks a few extra special moves. The game is effectively running on the Fighting Vipers engine, and at first glance it could basically be described as a simplified Fighting Vipers, and I do mean simplified. Look, in the realm of 3D fighters, most characters have at least 100 moves. That's how many moves characters had in the original Virtua Fighter, Virtua Fighter 1. So that's sort of the baseline. When a game has less than 100 moves, you really notice it. And when a game has 150 moves per character, then it's more modern. You get up to 200 moves, and it's actually quite impressive. Sonic Fighters, though, has a much smaller move list than your average 3D fighter. Making matters worse, the moves are shared between almost all the characters in the game. It's like they had, one core set of moves they copy-pasted over to each and every character in the game, but then they tweaked and changed each one of them in order to make them unique. So almost every character has the exact same weird goose step kick for their kick combo. A lot of the punch combos are very similar. All the characters have the item steal throw. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles all have spin dashes, which work effectively the same, and while SBO instead spins in place, it works the same as a spin dash regardless. However, there are noticeable differences, and this is where the game starts to get unusual. You see, most 3D fighters of the time were focused on realistic fighting, even Fighting Vipers, and thus they had normal fighting, karate, kung fu, whatever moves, things that you could actually physically do. Sonic the Fighters, though, in case you couldn't tell, is a rather cartoony game, with a lot of squash and stretch animation, characters getting flattened against walls. Heck, you could even hit them with a hammer and they xylophone out and get all short and stuff. It's rather Warner Brothers, admittedly, compared to how Sonic is now, a little bit jarring. He hasn't been this cartoony since, The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog? So it is a little bit odd, but this did free them up to come up with more unusual moves, effectively giving the characters actual special moves like in a 2D fighter. As I mentioned, Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles have their spin dashes. Amy has her hammer, which she can flatten you with. Doing a quarter circle and punch allows her to throw her hammer. I believe it's down, forward, and punch does a sidestepping hammer spin, while forward and kick, I believe it was, does a hurricane kick type maneuver. SBO, on the other hand, a half circle from back to forward and punch allows him to hit you with his extendable tongue. Meanwhile, Fang the Sniper, aka Knack the Weasel in America, except no one knows him as Knack the Weasel, the same way no one knows Sonic the Fighters' Sonic Championship, uses a pop gun and hits you with cork bullets, because you see, Sega of America felt that having a real gun in the game, like a giant Magnum like he was going to have, would be way too violent and just not appropriate. My, how times have changed. Anyway, Fang's moveset consists of a bunch of different ways in which he can shoot his gun, just shooting them straight forward, shooting them wildly in the air, etc., which definitely makes him feel very different. And then you have Bean the Dynamite, who weirdly hails from some kind of side-scrolling beat-em-up-ish type game called Dynamite Ducks, who throws bombs everywhere. It has a number of different ways he can throw those bombs. Forward plus kick allows him to kick a bomb along the ground. Forward punch allows him to throw a spread shot of 3 bombs in the air. Down forward punch twice does an uppercut, and then he throws some bombs, etc., etc. And this allows him to range out his opponents in ways that aren't normally possible for any other character except Fang, and kinda sorta Amy. And then Bark the Polar Bear, of course, is the grappler character, with the spinning lariat, and so on. These are the things that make the characters actually unique, and is a large part of what makes this game stand out, because again, all the other 3D fighters of the period basically just had a collection of normal karate fighting moves. They didn't really have special moves like this. And these special moves very, very much change the dynamics of the gameplay. And I gotta be honest, make Sonic the Fighters way, way more fun to play. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, Jell, you don't know what you're talking about. Fighting Vipers is so much better than Sonic the Fighters. I love Fighting Vipers. Man, Fighting Vipers was so awesome. Hey, guess what? Fighting Vipers was also released on Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Network. It's only $5 too. Why don't you go download that? Get back to me. Tell me how that is. Yeah, not as good as you remember, huh? Yeah, that game did not age well at all. I've had a number of friends do that to me, thinking, oh, well, Fighting Vipers is so awesome, and then they play it again, and they're like, maybe it wasn't as awesome as I remember. Though, admittedly, going back and playing Fighters Mega Mix, that actually plays significantly better than the original Fighting Vipers. But I'm getting a little off topic. My point is, these unusual moves, which are practically like special moves, are a huge part of what makes this game so enjoyable for me to play. Yeah, the movesets are way more limited, and a bunch of the moves are shared between all the characters, but the moves that actually are different and make each character unique really, really stand out, and really do make this game enjoyable to play. In a way, it's filling a particular niche. The niche of the simple, easy to pick up and play beginner's fighter. And I don't think that's something that should be ignored. The more I talk about it, the more people go, yeah, that is something we kind of need. Smash Brothers is kind of doing that nowadays. But back then, yeah, finding a fighting game that was this easy to play, wrap your head around, and get into was rather difficult. And thus, this was filling a somewhat necessary niche. In many ways, it's kind of like the 3D equivalent of Pocket Fighter. However, I'm not actually finished talking about the game. There's a few more things I need to bring up. First of all, pressing all 3 buttons simultaneously is how you sidestep, and I bring this up because it is a huge part of the game. Sidestepping is very important, and it's kind of awkward doing it with 3 buttons. Thankfully, in this port, you can reconfigure your controls, and you can set sidestepping to, like, the left trigger like I did, and that makes the game way, way more fun and easier to play. Having an actual sidestep button really, really helps. I do have to admit the controls feel kind of stiff. It's awkward and hard to explain, but a lot of them have a significant delay after you do them, leaving you open, and thus, yeah, the controls feel less responsive than you'd like them to be, though far from bad. I've certainly played stiffer. The game appears to have juggle combos in it, but I can't quite seem to pull them off. And much of the time the characters fall way too fast and seem to just go through a lot of my attacks. I'm not sure if this is a good thing or a bad thing. Perhaps it's a good thing there's such a limited play so the game doesn't get overcomplicated and broken with crazy, really, really hard to do juggles, or maybe it's a bad thing because the lack of serious juggling holds the game back from gaining any extra depth. It's a give or take kind of thing, and perhaps there's more there than just what I'm seeing. Also, in this game, you can run up the wall and do moves off the top rope, and do off-the-wall moves, which weirdly reminds me of DOA. However, I have a lot of difficulty actually pulling these moves off, making their implementation somewhat questionable. Also, this being a Sonic game, the music is friggin' awesome. What can I say? It's a Sonic game. Even the worst games in the series have awesome music. Speaking personally, I enjoy Sonic Fighters. I think it's actually a pretty fun little 3D fighter. It's sorely underrated. I think it truly deserves another chance. However, speaking objectively, the sheer number of shared moves, a microscopic moveset, definitely hold the game back, especially coupled with the stiff controls. And there's the fact that every time you play through arcade mode, the enemies come in the exact same order, which does make it get a bit boring if you're just playing the single player. Even still, I do like the game, but I don't think it's a great fighter. But at the same time, I don't think it's a bad fighter either. I think it's okay and really deserves a chance. Yeah, that's right, it's getting a 3 out of 5. Anyway, this is Gel, and you've been GameBabble. See ya.